It's kind of like this perfect moment where the right technology is available at the right time in the world. And that might actually be inspiring more of these types of regulations that we're seeing and the pain that we're feeling. So it's kind of this flywheel situation happening.
Before we get started with the show, here's a quick word from our sponsor, Global Training Center. As trade compliance professionals, you want to make sure that your procedures and documentation are completed as correctly as possible to avoid any delays and possible fines. We provide a range of trade compliance courses that will fit your needs. From in-person or web training to recorded on-demand courses, we can train one or even thousands on your team through your learning platform or on our portal. We can even customize a private session for your team. Go to globaltrainingcenter.com to find out more.
Folks, we're in for Simply Trade podcast, and we've got a new show here that is we're going to get to talk about the Trade Symposium and what went on there. So we've got a panel that is going to be phenomenal. These ladies are, I'm telling you, they scared me to death because I've had the privilege of meeting with every single one of them one-on-one as well as in a group. And I'm telling you, they pull no punches when it comes to me anyway. But Lila, we always, even as neither one of us would want to back down and we hit an issue, and then we always come out with some kind of compromise. But I'm going to tell you, and it never got personal, but it was always an intense debate. So it was always great. Anyway, with that, let me go ahead and introduce who we've got here. We've got Cindy Allen, who she and I have duked it out when she was a broker, when she was with Customs, when she was at FedEx and all that. Although you came to FedEx after I'd already left, I think. And all that. We have Amy Magnus with it's A&N Derringer, right? Amy is well respected in the industry. And again, we've had the privilege of working on a government private sector initiative. And then we have Amy Morgan, which Amy and I had a funny thing where I did. It's like I sent her an email over her career. And I thought I had all the current stuff, and I did have your current email, but the problem was I still had one of your old emails from 20 some odd years ago. And it didn't go through. Gee, go figure. But anyway, Amy Morgan has been around a while and in the industry, and we've had the privilege there. So, okay, Cindy, let's start with you on we're talking about the Trade Symposium that was held, was it in Philadelphia?
It was held in Philadelphia, and it's not the symposium anymore. It is the Trade Facilitation and Cargo Security Summit. So they renamed it and rebranded it a little bit, but basically it's the same. You have about 1,000 international trade folks coming together to listen to CBP talk about different things that are important to them and things that are important to the trade. It was, great seeing a lot of people from the industry. One of the biggest events of the year, actually, for those in international trade. And it's put on by the government. So you have a lot of government stakeholders there. Fantastic opportunity to meet with many of them. And I don't know, Amy, if you noticed it, but I noticed CBP hanging out with the trade a lot more than they have in the past. They sat with us, they talked to us, they stayed after. They, dare I say it, had a drink in the bar with us. It was
You mean they actually socialized with you?
Yeah, it was, it kind of brought me back to the older days, the older days. Oh my gosh, we're the older people, except for Amy Morgan, you're a baby. But it brought me back to the days when, we would have these massive trade support network meetings where Customs would actually sit with us and talk to us and have conversations. But I thought it was a good networking with CBP opportunity overall.
Amy Magnus, what, from your perspective, I assume you attended as well, right?
I did. I was really lucky to be able to go.
Good. And what'd you say in general as far as this year's summit?
Well, like Cindy, I did make some observations, and I thought that CBP was certainly more approachable than they have been in years past. But one of my takeaways is that they really need help from the trade. They have some pretty serious problems. And in fact, we as a country probably have some pretty serious problems. And oddly enough, it seemed to me that the emphasis was not as much on trade as it was on the smuggling of fentanyl. And, or at least that's the thing that resonated with me the most when I attended the sessions, is that CBP is really struggling to get their arms around this very dangerous drug. And, people in the United States clearly are being poisoned by this drug that's coming in. So I think that they really need to have more cooperation and assistance from those of us who are involved in the supply chain. And so that seemed to be a major focus. At least that's what I took away. And also another observation that I made is that it seemed like there was a whole lot more about enforcement than there was about facilitation. And that's just sort of the feeling that I got. So yes, CBP was very friendly and we got to socialize, but I think first of all, they need us. And secondly, I think that we are entering an era of enforcement, perhaps unlike anything that what we've seen in the past.
Amy Morgan, how about from your perspective then, your initial?
Yeah, I had a couple really interesting takeaways. So, Cindy mentioned that it used to be a different type of conference, right? There was a compliance symposium and there was the CTPAT conference. And then a few years ago, they squished them together. So now we have our summit, which is fine. And, but it used to be when I would go to the summit or the symposium, it was more of a kind of a rally, like these are the things we're focused on. Here's how you can help us. And then when you went to CTPAT, you knew you were going to be scared a little bit. It was bombs and it was drugs and it was things hidden in containers and smuggling and things. You sort of expected that. My very first takeaway after day one, that last week, was everybody was really sad at the end of the day. It was a really heavy day, right? You're talking about forced labor. You're talking about the opioid epidemic. You're talking about these really hard, scary topics. De minimis things are entering our homeland with, weapons and weapon parts. And it was really scary. That was actually the joke in the small talk joke in the elevator was like, are you scared? Are you ready for a drink? Like,
I was just going to say, is from the sound of it, that's why they were socializing. They needed a drink.
It was all drugs all the time. That's what I thought. All drugs all the time. And I second Amy Magnus's. It was very heavy enforcement. And the sad thing was, yes, I was scared. Yes, they talked about enforcement. Yes, they talked about the scourge that drugs really are in our society. But I, as an international trader, looked at some of the other folks and said, do you know what we're supposed to do about this? There was an hour-and-a-half panel on fentanyl and how CBP is working really hard to combat that and what they're doing. And I said, that could have been summed up in 3 sentences. Drugs are bad. Smuggling, money laundering is facilitating that. And CBP is doing everything it can to, facilitate finding that. But I, as an international trader, didn't know what I was supposed to do. Yeah, we're supposed to help, but how? And I was hoping to get a little more clarity in some of the breakout sessions, but a lot of it was just more of the same. Drugs are bad. Know your supply chain. Drugs are bad. Know your supply chain. Drugs are bad. Know your supply chain. And I remember being in one of the sessions where they talked about you should be educating the people who handle the freight more. And I just thought the people loading the boxes aren't really the ones who are putting the drugs in there. It's being interjected along the way. And I really struggled with, okay, this is what I need to go out and communicate to the trade about what they should do other than know your supply chain.
And can I just add to that? They did give us some information about what we could be looking for, vague descriptions on manifests, for example, that we should be mindful of that as perhaps a problem. They did mention precursor type chemicals, and they went through a list of those that we should be on the lookout for. They educated us, if you will, about pill presses and the parts that are a part of a pill press that are coming in and being, of course, described as like tools or, tool pieces. And they actually had, in some of the booths, they had samples of what a pill press type I don't even know what it's called, but it's just a little thing that presses pills. And they said, look, these things are coming in to the United States in very large volume. And of course, obviously you can legally import pill presses if you're a pharmaceutical company and you're making legitimate medication, but they are finding these things coming in a huge quantity to produce large numbers of pills that are being laced with fentanyl. And then, of course, the real struggle is the small little amount of fentanyl can be lethal. So when you look at just like less than a quarter of a teaspoon of some kind of powder, I mean, my God, think of all the millions of ways that something like that can be smuggled. But they also mentioned things like Glock switches that they found. And I don't know anything about that, but it's supposedly, at least according to what they were telling us, that particular item, which could come in as a tool part, can actually turn a weapon into an automatic weapon. And it's just this little tiny piece. So they were really trying to gin us up for looking out for vague manifests, what something might look like that is illegal. So all of these things, they just seem to be focused on. And clearly there is a problem. I mean, I'm really sympathetic with what they're trying to do here because there clearly is a problem. And smuggling comes in all forms, in all modes, in all ways. And the smaller the item, the easier it is to hide in anything.
Amy, let me ask you then with that, you mentioned something saying, with talking about chemicals as a precursor. Were they talking about like some chemicals, certain chemicals that are coming in that they're, people are mixing things together? And I see. Okay. I was going to like precursor to what? The pill or what?
Yeah, precursor to making the fentanyl. So it's the ingredients to make fentanyl and other opioids, but mainly fentanyl. So that was a heavy focus. And I thought, getting into the de minimis, drugs are bad. They're bringing in all these things under de minimis. But then one of the stats that they showed was 96% of all drug seizures are still coming on the southern border. So I thought that was very sobering. It's still coming, 96% of the drugs are still being seized on the southern border at the ports, not between the ports, but at the ports. So these are, drugs that are coming in via cars, via, individuals, via trucks, hidden in compartments. One of the things that I would love to see, and I don't think CBP has shared it, is how much drugs are coming in the actual cargo itself versus being hidden in the conveyance or on individuals, because that's really, where we as international traders can really focus our efforts on and help combat it.
Well, one of the things, and Amy Morgan, I'm going to talk to you here in a second regarding some of the systems and obviously your background right now with Altana. But Cindy, one of the things you started out was like, what are we supposed to do about this? And that comes out. I see the presentations, and it sounds like it has continued on with this. One of the things I think that I'm concerned about, based on what you're saying, is the impression that customs and the agencies are putting somewhat of an unrealistic expectation on brokers and on, carriers and folks like that are like, you're tendered a package. What should you be doing about it? I guess taking and trying to come out of this with some real, okay, I'm an importer or an exporter. And in this case, obviously importer related as far as this traffic coming in. Amy Morgan, dealing with this kind of scenario, it seems like vetting the parties you're doing business with, the suppliers, the customers, the distributors, the carriers even, I understand all that, but literally trying to figure out how to handle all this and where the red flags are. So I can't look at everything. So it was like, where do I need to focus my attention? So can the systems help me here? If I'm an importer compliance person, where the Sam Hill do I need to look? How am I going to handle all this? How's that for setting you up for a softball?
No, actually, so I want to turn your question on its side just a little bit as far as how I respond to it, because what I really took away from last week, after all the sessions, after the smuggling sessions, the de minimis sessions, the CTPAT sessions, GBI, all of these things, there is a common theme across all of these things that gets to the heart of what Cindy just talked about. It's leaving people scratching their heads. Well, how do I do this? Well, the common theme across all of those sessions, all of the themes last week, is really what Brandon Lord said in the GBI session about knowing how the products we make and then import are made is now more important than what it is and who we're getting it from and who we're selling things to, right? So take it out of just knowing your supply chain, which they said many, many times on repeat, right? And it's important, but it's more than just knowing your chain. It's actually understanding your products that you are facilitating across borders, right? So, your question, Andy, is then, can systems help us? Is there technology can help us? Can AI help us? And my answer to that is yes, because I don't think there is a solution without some sort of advanced technology that can take all the massive amounts of trade data that we generate and consume every minute of every day in this business and crunch it all together to paint that picture. Right there, you need a system. There needs to be a technology involved there. And so AI can help us pull that data together and then can illuminate that. You say a supply chain network, go deeper than supply chain, go down to the value chain. I want to see who I'm buying my finished goods from, and I want to know who they're getting their materials from and who they're getting their materials from, and then what farm they're getting their raw materials from. That's the common theme throughout everything last week. If you want to know how to comply with the UFLPA and be prepared for an applicability review, if you want to know how to find or use data to help find illegal drug trafficking in your chain, if you want to calculate your scope 3 carbon emissions or assess the compliance of your de minimis shipments, you name it, it comes down to knowing that the product and the product's own chain. And then you can screen that. Then you can work with that to do all of these things. That is the how. But nobody mentioned it. I don't expect everybody saw that. This is what I do all day. So of course I saw it. But that is the how for each and every one of those things that was talked about last week. And I will say, I'll end it on kind of a hopeful note, is that, Andy, I think because there are systems now, because we have the compute power now to do what I'm describing, I'm hopeful. It's kind of like this perfect moment where the right technology is available at the right time in the world. And that might actually be inspiring more of these types of regulations that we're seeing and the pain that we're feeling. So it's kind of this flywheel situation happening. But this is an interesting moment, and there are solutions that can actually help illuminate these things.
To add to that, Andy, being from FedEx, this, saying as well as I do. Fred Smith, the founder, was one of the first ones in the 70s to say the information about the package is as important as the package itself. And now it's gone a generation beyond. The information about how the good is made is as important as the good itself. And so it just keeps getting deeper and deeper into the information flow. And the other thing is you have all of this information you can screen, but how do you contextualize that information? That's where, Amy can present that information, and then companies really have to determine what am I going to do with this information? Now that I know this is a risk or that's not a risk, what am I going to do with that information? And there's a huge industry right now that I'm a part of, that are trying to help importers do that, to actually contextualize what they're going to do with that information now that they know about it.
Well, to your point, and here's the thing that I was going to go with, and Amy Magnus, I want to get your opinion on this in just a second. But Cindy and Amy Morgan, you guys are talking about, you've talked about the systems, and then, Cindy, you're talking about the data getting out there, knowing where to get some of this information. I mean, one of the things is like, okay, I need to get to, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 type suppliers or processes and all that. There is information out there. You're going to have to go and dig for it and go and pull for it. But one of the other things, and I think, Cindy, you touched on it, but this is where I want Amy Magnus, from a brokerage side, from a lot of us that are, somewhat tenured in the industry, some of this technology, it blows me away on the phenomenal capabilities of it. But at the end of the day, there still needs to be, you can have all these different systems and data, and it's filtering through, but you still got to have somebody go, what am I looking for? And it's like, you got to give somebody that's tenured, the ability to guide some of the younger folks, if you will, or rookies in the industry to go through that. The question is, how do we do that? I mean, there's some folks in the industry that are freaking out going, I'm going to lose my job over this. It's like, no. You're actually going to be so much more enhanced and being able to provide guidance to these folks. But I mean, how do you tap that, Amy, with, your service provider and your clients?
What a lead in. I'd like to spend just a few minutes on something that did come up in the Trade Summit, but also I see this as a little bit of a glimmer of hope. And I know not everybody's going to agree, but part of ACE 2.0 is something that they used to call blockchain, and then they called it distributed ledger, and now it's being called global interoperability. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on it because it's something that a lot of people just can't seem to grasp. But to me, it's actually pretty straightforward, which is you get information from what we call non-traditional parties earlier in the process. And this is all pre-arrival, pre-release type information that is being assembled in a way that is immutable. I'm not sure that that's the right use of that word, but that it's secure information that can be relied upon and cannot be changed. And it can be tagged so that you know from whom it is coming. Now, of course, everything can be, ruined somehow or another, but the concept of being able to lodge information in a way that can be accessible to those who need to know it, to use it for the purposes that they need it for. For instance, a carbon footprint may have nothing to do with what customs requires, but because this information is being collected right at the point of manufacturing, and then becomes accessible and reliable. And then we have the GBI, which we talked about at length the last time, the Global Business Identifier, where we're starting to identify additional parties in the supply chain. They all have a role here. There have been a couple of pilots that CBP has launched, and we were a part of at least one, really two. But one of them was the crude oil coming in on pipeline from Canada. Another one is the steel coming in from Mexico. And those were both tests of information that is being lodged in the way that I just described by non-traditional parties that is all there. So where's the broker fit in? Oh my God, all this information. Well, the broker is still filing an entry in the same way that we ever did before. But now there's more information in the early stages of the process, which could be accessible if there was some question. So you've got crude oil coming in from Canada. Is it USMCA applicable? Well, maybe you can go look into this global interoperability process and you can see, oh, I see exactly where it was pumped from the ground. I see exactly what was added to that pipeline and exactly what time it was added. And I see all the tickets that opened the gate and closed the gate as this oil flowed into the United States. So this information now is available to analyze. Now, imagine if more, now this isn't going to, not everybody's going to be able to use this process, but those who can use it may make more information available way earlier in the process. So you know that that cotton did not come from the Uyghur region, that it was actually grown, I don't know where, but someplace that doesn't use forced labor. You might be able to have visibility into these types of things. And by you, I mean you who have a need to know. You could be CBP, you could be a PGA, you could be some like greenscape type entity. All of this may come to pass with all of the new information that might be available to trace goods coming into the U.S.
And I'd love to piggyback on that. Andy, you and I talked before about ACE and the evolution. And I remember when ACS first came out, the brokers, the old school brokers who were still typing the entries, some of them said, we're going to go out of business. Automation is going to put us out of business. And they said the same thing in ACE. Even Customs said, oh yeah, we're going to put the brokers out of business at one point. And they have evolved from that. And really, brokers provide a service to importers because the importers don't have that capability to do it themselves. And I think that as this information flow goes through evolutions, the brokers are going to be able to provide services to input that data, review that data, look at that data, use tools like, Amy's at Altana to do a risk assessment on that data and really look at it. But I see it really staying, central to the broker. So it's the next evolution of automation is what it is, enabled by the computing power that we've never had before. And bringing that all together and having the tools to review that. And we're catching up to, kind of like the targeting system that CBP has without all of the visibility to all the bad things and all the intelligence and all of that. And I think that has led to something you said earlier, Andy, and love to get Amy Magnus's take on this as well, is the brokers are being asked to do more and more and more. And it's one thing if we're asked to do more for our clients and provide services, because that's how we make our living. We provide services to our clients. Where I grow concerned is where CBP and some of these other government agencies are asking the brokers to do more on the enforcement side. We saw the new broker regs come out requiring us to report fraudulent activity if we, cut ties with a company. But also I heard a lot about, brokers are going to do this, and brokers, we need you to do that. And brokers, we need you to, tell the carriers that their manifest isn't good enough. And brokers, and so we've become the sharp point on the spear for them. And I don't know that that's something that we really want to do.
Let me say this, is that there's also an issue. Yeah, Customs is going to, and the agencies, we want you to do X, Y, and Z and constantly push. There also comes not a legislative and regulation type problem here where service providers do not have the legal authority to do some of those things, and customs will keep saying, no, we want you to do that. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. And there's the pushback. Same thing where, express carriers are a big issue that comes up a lot of times. Why aren't you doing it? Now, keep in mind, customs are in facilities and in sort systems and our processes and sort facilities. And whether it's a commercial side, the express side, or whatever, one of the areas I will say that seems when we start going down this road, talking about the inadequate manifest, I guess, and it's a pet peeve of mine, but as we go through all these different things that are going on and it's, they tout, well, we've got to, make sure this is done and that's done. What about the post office? I mean, come on. And that's one of the big holes out there. And everybody jumps through hoops for all these other, private sector companies and carriers and everything else. And then you let somebody set up a transborder bandit type facility with a trucking that's very minimal, or a postal facility going through and they let it go through it. And it's like, well, what are we doing jumping through hoops and you're letting it go through there? So I guess as I come through, one of the things I'm hearing from all of you, though, is if you're that good corporate citizen, you really need to take the steps to go after the data, come through and merge your systems and your data files and do the things that you can do and cross those T's and dot those I's. And then, the trade facilitation, if you will, if you've done those things, more than likely your freight's going to get moved through. And hopefully the red flags of where customs and other agencies need to focus on, this other stuff is moved through so that they can get to that. And that's what, I guess, in the overall, what we're hoping for here. Does that sound pretty fair to y'all?
Yeah, but Amy, I'd love to hear, as a past president of the NCBFAA, representing the brokers. I'm a broker, but I'm not employed by a broker right now. What are your thoughts on customs asking us to be their enforcement arm?
A couple of things here, just real quickly. Is it too much to ask that we at least know with whom we're doing business? That we somehow vet our customers, and I'm not sure that vet is the proper word, but that we somehow know with whom we're doing business. Is that too much to ask? Is it too much to ask to be very careful about the HTS numbers that we're providing on documentation or on data submissions to customs? Is that too much to ask? Is it too much to ask to go back to suppliers with whom we may not even have a relationship with, but say, hey, wait a minute, your descriptions are inadequate. We cannot make a decent filing with the descriptions that you've been providing us. So I think some of these asks are not crazy. However, is it too much to ask that we know what's in the box? Absolutely. Is it, because we'll never know what's in the box. We can only reasonably rely on the information that's provided us. But I do think that we need to have tools in place, and maybe Amy M knows more about this than I do. But I do think, oh, whoops, I'm Amy M too.
You can say that. Don't worry, Amy.
As you mentioned earlier, we can do some of our own sort of targeting, things that don't make any sense. Like this package weighs 1,000 pounds and it's only valued at $25. It's some kind of intelligence that we can build into our own systems, is way over my head, but I know that such things exist. So look, it might be too much to ask, but I think that in our new environment, we're going to have to start thinking like that.
Amy, can I ask you, I'm so sorry, Lalo, but Amy, I'm really curious, especially given your past experience, and there is no regulation that says you must know these exact things. We know that. But we also know that there is a requirement that all of us as brokers exercise reasonable care and responsible control and supervision. Do you have any insight, or can you see where, because new technology exists that make it possible to do these things, that those expectations may get updated, even if the regulation itself doesn't get updated. So it's sort of this implied, like, you will have to use this new technology. We expect you to because it's available to you. Do you see that happening?
I definitely do. And I think we can just go on cbp.gov and look, for example, on their recommendations of how we should be reviewing powers of attorney, for example. That is not a regulatory requirement yet, but it is a statutory requirement under the TEFTA. They just haven't written the enabling regulations for that section, where brokers will be required to do a certain amount of reviewing before we accept a power of attorney, and that we will ultimately have to review that more and more. So we know that's coming. It just hasn't been written yet. So I don't think it's too far of a stretch, Amy, for Customs to start posting on their website other best practices that they expect brokers to be employing within their operations. And if we're not employing their recommended best practices, they may come to us and say, you, broker, are not exercising responsible supervision and control over your business because we have made these recommendations and you've ignored them. I see that. I definitely see that coming.
Lalo, you started to jump in there.
Well, I just had a few comments. First of all, what Amy Magnus said earlier about knowing about your products and everything. So we do have an episode. I just wanted to remind everybody, Vinny Annunziato talked extensively about that. So if y'all want to catch that, we aired that second week in January.
Interoperability, yeah.
Yes. So he did talk about that, and thank you, Amy, for bringing that up, because he promised that he gave us the exclusive on that before the summit. So I'm hoping that I was hoping that was true. So I'm glad he did say that. So the other thing is that I want to comment, and again, it's not really a question. It's more like a comment. And I never really say or claim that I'm like, I know any of this. In fact, that's why I tend to invite really smart people like you ladies to the show, because it's better to be a fly in the wall than to say, oh, I know all this. You know, I'd rather listen from you ladies and other guests. But one of the things I want to say or comment on is that we just started April, and we've been I have anyway, to at least 3 conferences where I've either been asked to speak or just attended. And it's funny how all 3, one of them was addressing logistics, exclusively logistics. The other one was on cargo and freight, which is the TPM conference. And the other one was on international trade professionals, so compliance, international trade. And it's funny how all 3 have emphasized and focused a lot on supply chain visibility. So obviously this is something that's affecting all industries or sectors within our business, you know, anything and everything that touches that part. There was something that was really interesting that at the TPM conference, there was a gentleman called Eric Johnson. If I remember correctly, please forgive me if I didn't. He works for S&P Global, you know, Journal of Commerce. He's one of the directors there, but he had a really good talk about supply chain visibility. He's talking about how it's really cool how we can get a lot of the AI, a lot of the software, a lot of the technology is getting very good, like your software, Amy, where you can identify and get all these stats on products on the supply chain. He said the problem is that none of that is going to matter if you, and this is again, I'm trying to recall, but if I recall, he said, it's not going to matter if you don't know what to do with that data. And I think a lot of you in this podcast earlier are even saying that. I mean, what good is that going to be if Amy Magnus, you said, I didn't know, you know, what to do with that data. I mean, yeah, it says this part is 1,000 pounds, but I mean, you know what I mean? And so I just, again, wanted to comment on that because it feels like even the Trade Summit touched on that, on supply chain visibility. You know, it's just a recurring theme, you know, that keeps on coming up. And I'm sure we'll hear about it next week at NCBFAA at the annual conference. So anyway, I just wanted to comment on that.
I 100% agree with you, Lalo. I think that Supply chain visibility is the thing right now. It's revolutionizing the industry because of the technology, and it doesn't matter who you are in the supply chain, who you are in international trade. You have to know this, whether you're transporter, carrier, customs broker, importer, exporter, consultant, whatever. You have to have visibility to the supply chain because it's out there. And we've heard from many CBP in different forums say the tools are out there. So they consider it a best practice, like Amy Magnus said. So we should all be looking at how to incorporate that and then what to do with the data. Because that's the other thing. I talk to companies all the time. We have all of this data. What does it mean? What should I do? What's my plan of action? And I think it's telling.
And another angle into the same thing, and Lalo, you brought it up, you went to logistics conferences, a freight conference, an ICPA, right? Compliance conference. This conversation is not limited to this group either. Think about all the other functions within all of our client companies. So Amy Magnus, all of your enterprise clients that are using your business are now looking at themselves and they're thinking, compliance is talking to supply chain and we're talking to procurement and we're talking to sourcing and now we're talking to finance, and all of these previously siloed functions within a company now have to work together. They have to collaborate to know this stuff in order for each and every one of them to achieve their goals, right? And the thing that I get excited about this topic is the thing that we all fought for, at least when I started. I started my compliance career in the very early 2000s. And you never got visibility. You were at the end of the food chain. You know what? You will classify what I tell you we're buying. Okay, that's my job. But now this environment and the technology that's enabling it now is elevating that role of the compliance professional way upstream within their companies, which only bodes well for the brokers, right? You should get better information, earlier information, and greater insight that will only help all across a company. So I think it's bigger than just our trade, transportation, and compliance ecosystem. It's bigger than that.
Right. And as a company here, like what we do for Global Training Center, when we do training, we don't relay the message of, okay, now you know how to classify. Okay, now you know how X, whatever it is that we're teaching. That is like actually it's not a mission because it's not like it doesn't really go well with a mission statement, but it is part of our goal is to teach and tell our attendees, and even most of our marketing is to create a trade compliance culture. That's all it is. You got to create a trade compliance culture within your organization. And for all of you who have been listening to this podcast, you actually pick up on that on just about almost every single guest that we've had on our show for the last almost 2 years. That supply chain. I mean, and I hate to be preaching to the choir because mostly everybody is listening to this are trade compliance people, and so they're like, yeah, hallelujah. But I mean, hopefully they share this with their managers, like the accounting and engineers and everything, because there is a lot, like you said, Amy, a lot has to do with that.
Well, and you have to get through other departments and other organizations. Let me stop for a second here. We've talked about really that first day, and it opened up a lot of conversations, and it was like, we've kind of gotten bogged down in the quagmire here. What about the following day? Was there hopefully some uplifting type things of something that's happening here or whatever? Is it gloom and doom and, it's like, oh, bother?
Well, I think, it was a little bit uplifting. What I always find interesting at the summit, the symposium, is you get a little glimpse into how CBP is thinking and what they're doing. So I think that's really valuable. So they opened the kimono just a little bit, and we saw, it's all about enforcement, all about, what they're doing, all about technology, and then de minimis. Which, we keep saying we're going to have an Amy Cindy panel on de minimis because we come at.
I want to jump into that one at some point here. I'm looking forward to that good discussion
from two different perspectives. But I think that what I heard on de minimis specifically was I look at the de minimis environment really as being driven by consumer buying habits. You know, it has largely been, regardless of the who lobbied for a higher de minimis amount, who was against it. What really drove it is consumer buying habits, and we want stuff delivered right to our door. And that fundamentally is changing the way transportation happens, the way sales happens, the way warehousing happens. And at the back end of that, like Amy talked, in the early 2000s, compliance was on the back end. On the very back end of that was customs going, oh, wow, this has really changed. I view it as fundamentally a fundamental change, like containerization. When containerization happened, you went from a bulk environment to containerized freight, and that changed everything. And I think right now we are entering or have been in a massive change to how freight and information flows that are coming together all at the same time, driven by consumer buying habits this time that have demanded where I want my good at my door. I don't want to have to go to a store unless I want to go there. I want things brought to me. And that's fundamentally changed. And CBP is challenged in thinking about how to handle that, because we're seeing that 1.2 billion shipments are coming in under de minimis. There's only 40 million normal shipments. So their entire world has changed, and they're trying still to look at the old model and fit this 1.2 billion shipments into an old model. So now they are looking at, oh yeah, when we open a truck and there's not a container exam station, there's 12, 15,000 shipments in there, and we don't know what to do with it. And the express folks are saying, well, we know what to do, but it comes to the officers differently. In the express environment, they're pulling these containers apart. They're pieced shipments, and that shipment, if it's tagged by CBP, it's delivered to the officer. Here's the package that you wanted to view. Here is the, what you want to look at. That doesn't exist in any of the other environments. And I think they haven't really identified that, or are beginning just to identify that the presentation of the package is one of the main challenges that they have, because they're tying up an entire truck for 3 packages that they want to find, and they don't know how to do that. So it's I think a couple of different things that I see CBP being challenged with. And, according to the press and according to the Hill and some in trade, de minimis is the root of all evil. But the stats don't show that. You're going to have.
I got to jump in, but to your point, though, here's the thing: is that obviously the express mode of transportation has really capitalized on the de minimis because of extensive systems, data, and automation and all of that, in the sort systems and all of that. Where I see part of the problem has come into play is the allowance of people trying to utilize that de minimis in a, shall we say, a containerized environment, a truck environment, without that automation, without, and to me, I'm looking at it going, from a customs perspective, if you're going to allow them to do that, then the carrier is going to have to figure out how to deliver that package that they want to inspect. Regardless, I don't think this is on the backs of customs. They still have to peruse that. It's billions. I get that.
And but they released a lot of stats that I find very interesting in the e-commerce panel. And the express industry only imported 190 million de minimis shipments in 23. Postal was 81 million, so going significantly down. The non-express industry, which includes truck and the Type 86, were 781 million. So it is in the vast majority of that, because I think the truck was only around 160 million. The vast majority of that are ocean and normal air shipments where customs brokers are clearing the freight, but customs brokers don't handle the freight. So in the express environment, it's closed loop. So you have the broker, the carrier, the express entity. They do all the things and they give it to CBP. In that other environment, it's siloed still. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges that CBP needs to solve to really facilitate this. And if you again look at CBP's own stats, the value is still under $60. The average value of a shipment is still under $60. So it's not, massive things, but I know Amy Magnus, of course.
No, I want to just say two things because I think that this is a whole hour conversation and there is a lot to be said here. I think there's a couple of things maybe in closing. The external environment has changed and the small package environment has actually, and it was said at the summit, it has changed the culture in the United States. And of that, I totally agree. So it would certainly warrant a lot more discussion about the good, the bad, and the ugly of what is going on in this current environment. But one thing we know for sure is, and I hate to say it, but I feel like customs was kind of caught flat-footed here. This tsunami of small packages has just flooded their environment. And I don't believe that they were adequately prepared for it. And that's what we're confronted with now. An external environment changed and all of us probably weren't prepared as adequately as we should have.
Amy and Cindy, playing off of that, because I've in my previous to Altana role, I was also working in cross-border e-com, and I've seen this increase since my Amazon days in the way back times. And so this increase has been building over the last decade, right? So when you say customs was caught flat-footed, do you think part of that is because of the pressure of the new regulations like forced labor and because of the opioid epidemic? It's not necessarily just the volume. It's actually now the pressures in addition to the volume that are stressing them out, right? So if it's just the volume, like Cindy was talking about, like there's some infrastructural things that need to be addressed in order to address it. But what about the other things? Like, is that part of the equation, really? That when you say caught flat-footed, is it really that?
It's all of the above. I would say all of the above. There are a lot of external changes that the small package environment has brought about, including fentanyl, which is, like we've talked about earlier, a very, very dangerous, poisonous drug that can be in itty bitty quantities. So, but there's always been smugglers. There always will be smugglers. That's nothing new. It's just that now there's another environment that they can capitalize on to do their smuggling.
And we know from CBP that people who want to smuggle take the path of least resistance. So, that path may have been, via small package, but as the technology went up and, a lot of the express carriers got actual physical x-rays and physical screening, that wasn't the easiest way because a lot of it was found by CBP and by the carriers themselves. So it went to a less impactful or less looked at environment, which now is the truck environment on the southern border. And also, if you look at the history, a lot of it was coming from China, and the drug cartels in Mexico, were losing a piece of the pie. And so they increased their knowledge of that, how to do it. And, now it's being produced in Mexico rather than being produced in China. So it's an ever evolving threat landscape for CBP. And I think that, this Section 321, de minimis, whatever you want to call it, is all of those things. So it allows, if it is the easiest way to get goods in. But I think with all of the technology and all of the expectations that CBP is beginning to communicate for those using de minimis, it's not going to be the easiest way to get things through anymore. It's gonna normalize kind of across all of the modes of transportation and all of the entry types.
Well, and to that point, I would say there is a definitive need, in my personal opinion, and I don't know if you'll agree with this, is that there really should be a focused, government, private sector working group on this that has probably some subcommittees for each mode of transportation to truly address it and come back with something, because one size doesn't fit all on each of those modes and dealing with it. Fairness in trade here, this is one of those things where there's a lot of circumvention on using the de minimis from foreign sources that are putting American businesses at a disadvantage, and all kinds of things. So all said and done, I think, I'm looking forward to another discussion. We need to put a panel together. So we may need to do a series on it, because it's not an easy deal. And it's also, lots of folks get passionate about it and whatnot. So we'll see what happens. At the end of it all, let me just say, let's go around the horn here as far as a wrap up. Maybe the key takeaway and action that somebody may need to take based on as far as the summit. Cindy, let me start with you and see what you, we've been talking here a while. It's a good discussion. What do you want folks to do based on what you just mentioned and talked about?
I'm just going to say one word: compliance.
And I will know your supply chain. That's it. Know your supply chain. And I see CBP starting to reach out to the trade a little bit more to work with us. So, be prepared to participate as you can.
Okay. Amy Morgan.
I will modify Cindy's comment, know your supply chain, and I'll say, know your value chains, know your products, and be open to the different technologies that enable you to think differently about trade compliance if you were to know more about your products. Because I think in there is the answer to all of the hows across all of those themes from last week. So that would be my I guess recommendation.
Well, and from what I'm gathering, there is a concerted effort, not only by customs, but to other agencies, as well as foreign agencies, if you will, or foreign governments, to collaborate and cooperate with each other. And that means exchange of data amongst the government entities. So you better make sure your data is fine. Clean up your backyard, clean up your data, whatever. Make sure you're doing things right. And there's going to be a collaboration in that. And as such, if you're doing things correctly, your freight should be facilitated and out the door, and hopefully compliant in the confirming of it with the 7501. And if not, you're going to have a lot to answer for. So, ladies, thank you so much. Listen, we could keep talking. I love talking to y'all. Y'all are just such a great group. Lalo, as far as the contact information and all that, I guess we'll have that with our show notes and whatnot, right?
Yes, everything will be on there. And if any of the guests or ladies want to share anything on their sites, those will be on there as well. And I mean, it's been a very information-packed show. So I'm really glad we had you all come on, and looking forward to seeing you all maybe next week. I don't know if any of you are going to be there. Yep, awesome, Cindy. We'll see you.
In Freight Forwarders Conference, and to our listeners, folks, if you think these ladies are full of beans, or I am, or whatever, and you want to, voice your opinion on that, come on, bring it on. Let's have a good discussion and reach out to us. So, with that, we're going to turn over the show and turn your day back to you. So, have a great day.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show or would like to sponsor Simply Trade or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.